On September the 21st, 2015, a motorist was involved in a road rage incident which was filmed on a GoPro camera. And the grandad from Hull became a viral sensation due to him repeatedly shouting at the moped rider, "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? I'm Ronnie Pickering." Although Road Rage Ronnie was using "Do you know who I am" as an arrogant expression of self-importance, not knowing who someone is can have consequences. And an elderly lady walked into a church building for the first time, and she said, "I'd like to sit on the front row, please." The man on the welcome team was very helpful, and he said to her, "You don't want to do that. The pastor's really boring." The elderly lady said, "Do you know who I am?" The guy said, "No." She said, "I'm the pastor's mother." He says, "Do you know who I am?" She says, "No." He says, "Good," and quickly turned and disappeared into the church building. It is useful to know who somebody is. And this summer, we're looking at the 7 statements from John's Gospel that help us to understand who Jesus is, what he does, and what that means for us. And last week, we looked at Jesus being the bread of life who satisfies our hunger. And Ray reminded us of Moses' encounter with God at the burning bush and the huge significance of that phrase, "I am." All other religious leaders say things like, "I show," or "I know." Only Jesus Christ says, "I am." And every single time he makes one of these "I am" statements, he does so deliberately, so that those who are listening will understand that unlike Ronnie Pickering, this is not an arrogant statement of self-importance, but Jesus helping us understand his true identity and purpose. And we're going to read from John chapter 8, verse 12 to 20, and I've got a very special little helper who's going to read the Bible passage for us.
When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." The Pharisees challenged him. "Here you are, appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid." Jesus answered, "Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid. For I know where I came from and where I am going. But you have no idea where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I pass judgment on no one. But if I do judge, my decisions are true, because I am not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law it is written that the testimony of 2 witnesses is true. I am one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me." Then they asked him, "Where is your Father?" You do not know me or my Father," Jesus replied. "If you knew me, you would know my Father also." He spoke these words while teaching in the temple courts near the place where the offerings were put. Yet no one seized him because his hour had not yet come.
Give him a round of applause. Wasn't that fantastic? Thank you. I am the light of the world. It's a very well-known statement, but unless we understand when and where these words were spoken, we'll fail to appreciate their massive dramatic impact and huge significance. Jesus makes this statement during the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem. This feast was celebrated every autumn and commemorated when the Israelites lived in the wilderness for 40 years, and God guided them by a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. And during the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths as it was sometimes called, the Israelites would build a shelter or a booth which they'd live in for the duration of the feast. And 4 huge candelabras would be placed in the outer court of the temple, and these big bowls of burning oil would be placed on the top of them and would be kept lit to shed light over the whole city for the 8 days of the festival. And it's this setting that Jesus uses to announce that just as God led the Israelites out of the wilderness and into the promised land, he himself is the light to lead people out of darkness and into a new life. And we're going to think a little bit more about that statement in a minute, but we need to understand the rest of the passage as well. The Pharisees, the religious people, as usual, didn't like what Jesus is saying. So they try and discredit him by saying that his testimony is invalid. But Jesus turns the whole situation round, and he uses it to emphasize his identity and his unique relationship with God. At least 7 times in this passage, Jesus points to the fact that he's from the Father. He speaks with the Father's authority. He's going to the Father. Jesus says he speaks from God, for God, and as God. And Jesus is the light of the world because he is one with the Father. And what he's saying is absolutely valid because he and his Father are both witnesses. Now, we all know that light is essential for life. Plants need light for photosynthesis to take place. The human body needs light to produce vitamin D, to regulate our sleep patterns, and for many other biological processes to take place. But light isn't just essential for our physical health, but also for our emotional health and well-being. And lack of daylight in the winter months can cause low mood and lack of interest in life, aptly named SAD, or seasonal affective disorder. And people who are depressed are encouraged to get outdoors and enjoy light. Criminals used to be punished by being put in dark dungeons, which often led to death because our minds and bodies need light to survive. And it's interesting that science, have we got the PowerPoint, please? That science says that 4 things are essential for life: water, light, food, and air. And at another festival, Jesus declared that anyone who believes in him will have living water. This week, we're looking at Jesus being the light of the world. Last week, we looked at Jesus being the bread of life. And when God created man, he breathed into him his breath. Could it be that perhaps Jesus himself is essential for life? And light is so important that it's the very first thing that God created. The opening verse of the Bible tells us, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day and the darkness night. I just want to think about darkness for a moment. Like Terry said, darkness creates fear. Many children and adults are scared of the dark. Darkness disorientates us. It paralyzes us so that we're afraid to move. And most violent crime occurs at night under the cover of darkness. Darkness destroys and creates fear, but light brings life. And thousands of years ago, a prophet named Isaiah wrote, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned." And this prophecy that we often hear at Christmas refers to the coming of Jesus as the light of the world. Think about it. When Jesus was born, the shepherds saw a bright light when all the angels appeared to them. What did the wise men follow in the sky? A star, a bright light. And what words does every single announcement of the birth of Jesus start with? Fear not. We no longer need to fear because light has come into the world. When a child's scared of the dark, they need one of two things. They need someone to turn on the light, or they need someone to be with them. Jesus does both. He came to be the light in our darkness and to be Emmanuel, to be God with us. And there are people here this morning who feel that they are living in a land of deep darkness. Maybe you're suffering with depression or bereavement or loss or a sense of hopelessness, or that you feel under spiritual attack. But every day it's a struggle just to keep going. God is saying to you this morning, you are not alone. I am here with you. I am here for you. Let me be the light in your darkness. And did you notice that Genesis tells us that God separated the light from the darkness? And there's an old fable that says, once upon a time, there was a dark cave hidden away from view. And because it was so deep in the earth, the cave had never seen light. The word light meant nothing to the cave, who couldn't imagine what light might be. And one day the sun sent an invitation to the cave, inviting it to come up and visit. And when the cave came up to visit the sun, it was amazed and delighted and was dazzled by the wonder of the experience. Feeling so grateful to the sun for inviting it to visit, the cave wanted to return the kindness and invited the sun to come down and visit, because the sun had never seen darkness. So the sun visited the cave and looked round with great interest, wondering where the darkness would be. Then it became puzzled and said to the cave, "But where is the darkness?" And the message of the story is obviously that light and darkness cannot coexist. They are mutually exclusive. Light always drives out darkness. And 1 John chapter 1 verse 5 reminds us that God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. And Jesus is the light of the world. But he's not just a light for the world. He is the light of the world. Isaiah 49 reminds us that but Jesus, when God says, "I will make you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring my salvation to the ends of the earth." This light isn't just for the Jews, not just for those living in Israel, but for everyone, everywhere. Jesus is the light of the world. Therefore, a world without Jesus will inevitably be a place of darkness. And there are two types of darkness: physical darkness and spiritual darkness. And in Scripture, darkness is often a metaphor for sin, for sin's consequences, for death, and for everything that's not of God. Whereas light symbolizes redemption, spiritual awakening, goodness, peace, and all that is of God. Light brings hope. We talk about light breaking through the darkness and of there being light at the end of the tunnel. And we need the light of the world because we live in a spiritually dark place. Once upon a time, there was a village full of men who were always mad at each other. They'd stay up late at night, drink, smoke, gamble, and fight. Only one woman lived in the village. She was a prostitute who became pregnant, but died as she was giving birth. None of the men knew who the father was, so they all decided to raise the baby. At first, they put the baby in a cardboard box with some rags, but that didn't look right. So one of the men walked down into the valley and bought a beautiful cot. Another man went and purchased a warm baby blanket, and another found some clothes for the baby to wear. The men took turns holding the child and feeding him. At night, they rocked the baby to sleep. Since they didn't want to wake the baby, they stopped fighting and drinking. They needed money to feed the baby, so they stopped gambling and worked hard in the fields so that they could provide for the baby. And after a period of time, they realized that the baby had completely changed their lives. That baby chased away the darkness in that village. I'm not entirely sure of the reliability of this story, but I do know the truth about another baby whose birth continues to drive out darkness and to transform the lives of many people. His name is Jesus Christ. He was born to a virgin named Mary in a little town called Bethlehem, and his birth brings light into our darkness. And we need Jesus not only to drive out the darkness in us and the darkness around us, we also need the light of the world to give us direction. Light shows us which way to go. Lighthouses guide ships to safety and prevent them running aground on rocks that they otherwise wouldn't see. And while we were on holiday in Cyprus the other year, we visited a beach where sea turtles lay their eggs. And when these eggs hatch, the little baby sea turtles follow the light of the moon and walk down the beach and into the sea. But over recent years, some of the new baby turtles, rather than following the light of the moon, have been distracted and disorientated by lights from the local beach bar and from traffic in the nearby town. And instead of walking into their intended freedom and life in the ocean, they've walked in the wrong direction, resulting in death. Jesus Christ is the light of the world. He is the light we need to follow to enjoy freedom and fullness of light. But 2 Corinthians 11 verse 14 warns us that Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. We need to be very careful that we're not following the opinions and the so-called wisdom of this world, rather than following the true light of Jesus. The psalmist reminds us in Psalm 119, verse 105, that God's word is a lamp for our feet and a light for our path. We need to listen to what God says, not what the world says, for guidance and direction in life. And without God and without his word, we risk heading in the wrong direction and, like the baby sea turtles, ending up in death rather than in the fullness of life that can be found in Jesus. So, light overcomes darkness, light gives us direction, and finally, in order to benefit from the light, we need to make a decision. After Jesus announced that he is the light of the world, he says, "Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Following Jesus involves a deliberate decision. We either choose to follow Jesus or we choose not to. There isn't a third option. The Greek word that's used here for follow is a continuous verb, meaning that following Jesus is a continuous action. Following Jesus is more than tagging along behind him. It's not like following him on social media, following someone on social media where you check in occasionally or put the odd thumbs up emoji on one of their posts. John Piper says that following Jesus means following him for who he is, being so taken with him that you join yourself to him. Jesus says, "Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Why on earth would anyone choose to walk in darkness? Now, I have to confess that there's one thing that my husband does that really, really annoys me. Just the one. And it's when I'm fast asleep in bed and he comes in and he switches the light on. Now, I don't immediately jump out of bed, and help him look for whatever it is he thinks that he so desperately needs. I usually tell him, very politely of course, to turn the light off. And the reason that I want to turn the light off is because my eyes have become accustomed to the dark and the light hurts. It's the same if you're driving down a country lane in the pitch black and you see someone coming towards you with a full beam on and you mutter something about someone not understanding the importance of dipped headlights. When we're accustomed to darkness, light is uncomfortable. When we are living in the darkness of sin, the light of Christ will be uncomfortable. And John 3:19 tells us, this is the can we have a PowerPoint, please? This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. A couple of years ago, we got a new vacuum cleaner, and it's fantastic at picking up the dust and the dirt and the dog hairs. But it's got a light on the front. And when I switch my vacuum cleaner on and it shows how dirty my floor is, I'm mortified. The light exposes the dirt, but once it's seen for what it is, it can be dealt with, and my floors can be clean again. In the same way, the light of Jesus exposes sin, not to embarrass us, but so that it can be dealt with, and so that our lives can become clean again. But we have to decide whether or not we will allow this light into our lives. Can you imagine a dying person refusing a doctor, or a starving person refusing food? A drowning person refusing a lifeboat, or a freezing person refusing a warm coat? Yet many people still refuse to accept Jesus. The first chapter of John's Gospel tells us that Jesus came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. And receiving Jesus involves that decision. There was a famous artist called, have the picture, thanks, Holman Hunt, who painted a picture of Jesus as the light of the world knocking at the door of someone's heart. And art critics pointed out that he'd made a mistake because he'd forgotten to put a handle on the door. But the artist answered this was deliberate because the handle for the door is on the inside, because the door can only be opened from inside. And there's a Bible verse in Revelation where Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me." Jesus will never force his way into anyone's life. He patiently waits and knocks at the door. We need to decide whether or not we'll open that door and allow his light to shine in our darkness, to give us direction and to give us life in all its fullness. Can I have the band back up, please? And then the last PowerPoint slide up. Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." He is the light that will drive out darkness and bring direction. He is the light we can build our lives upon. He is the light we can build our families upon. He is the light that leads to life. And he's knocking at the door of your heart this morning. God loves you so much that he came to earth to make a way for you to be reconciled to himself and to enjoy eternity with him. Don't stumble about in darkness. Allow the light of the world to guide you, to give you direction. Recognize afresh this morning that Jesus is who he says he is. He is I am. He is Yahweh. He is the Lord Almighty. Make a decision not only to receive him, but to follow him continuously, because he really is a way maker, a miracle worker, a promise keeper, and the light in our darkness.